A wind howls against the eaves, the windows rattle, a candle flickers and dies. Was that a sound, the creaking of footfalls, or just the groaning of the wood? And you pull up the blankets over your head. It's only your imagination, after all. Goblins don't exist, yet from somewhere close by, you could swear you hear laughter. The devious, sometimes dangerous goblin is an infamous being whose name is now well known all across the world, in large part thanks to the works of Tolkien and to other fantasy writers and games that followed in his grand shadow. Like much of Tolkien's work, they were at least partly based on beings of the same name who appear in Western European folktales. However, some of these folktale accounts are quite divergent from the image Tolkien wanted to portray, which is why, in Lord of the Rings, intended to be a work for a more mature reader, he generally opts for the word orc, despite having primarily used the word goblin in The Hobbit. Orcs and goblins are actually supposed to be the same creatures in the books. But what were these goblins which haunt the pages of early modern folktales? Are they just literary inventions, or do they have a more mysterious, archaic origin? What are goblins? Hi friends, I'm Kevin McLean. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and consider supporting the channel through Patreon, PayPal, YouTube, Super Stickers, or become a member. You can also check out the merch store for t-shirts and other products related to the channel. Thank you all very much for your support. These are not troll make. They are old swords, very old swords of the high elves of the west, my kin. They were made in Gondolin for the Goblin Wars. They must have come from a dragon's horde, or goblin plunder. For dragons and goblins destroyed that city many ages ago. This Thorin, the runes name Orcrist, the goblin cleaver in the ancient tongue of Gondolin. It was a famous blade. Wading through the later folktales of goblins and ascribing any coherence to it is almost beyond possibility. They often appear interchangeable with dwarves or elves. By the time these stories were recorded, pre-Christian folk beliefs had dwindled, and the earlier distinctions between different spirits was not always retained. Yet unlike many of the gods who became merged into the identity of the Christian god, or saints, there was no easy Christian analog for these lesser worldly spirits. So even as the distinct details of them fade, belief in them, though muddled, was preserved by many people into the modern era. Even the meaning of the word goblin is extremely muddy. Many believe the word originates from the French language and was imported into English by the Normans. It is first attested in the form of medieval Latin, gobelinus, in 1141, used as a name for a certain daemon which haunted Normandy. The ultimate origin of this Latin name is believed to be at least influenced by Greek kobalos. In Greek mythology, the kobali are trickster spirits known for theft, pranks, and frightening people. They were companions of Dionysus, and once even stole from Heracles. Kobalos is thought by some to be the origin of the Germanic kobold, which, if true, may devastate many D&D players. However, it's possible that gobelinus is instead adapted into medieval Latin from the Germanic Frankish language, and that both gobelinus and kobalos actually derive from the same origins and represent a common archaic name for a similar being, possibly going back even to Proto-Indo-European times. A Latin origin for such a popular name would not be entirely unusual, for it's now believed by Gaelic language etymologists that the word leprechaun is derived from the Latin Lupercalia, a festival celebrated in Rome and initiated by Romulus, where young men ran around naked, whipping women with goat leather straps for fertility. Medieval Gaels may have saw some similarities between what they knew of the festival and various folk spirits. However, it may be more plausible that kobold derives instead from a Proto-Germanic word kubo, referring to a shed, hut, or other enclosure. In Dutch, this is the origin of the name kabouter, which is the Dutch word for a kobold, with an obvious identical root. The etymology suggests that goblins began as house-dwelling spirits, and likely not benevolent in nature, although such spirits are always thought to be tricky and could work ill if they were displeased. Traditionally, certain rituals would be carried out to placate them. The offerings of milk and cookies to Santa Claus on Christmas by some is a vague remnant of such a tradition, although in that specific case linked to elves. Possibly a medieval Latin rendering of the name kobalos fused with the Germanic kobold to result in goblin. A possible earlier Old English form, equivalent to kobold, was possibly supplanted by a later Norman-inspired goblin. Whatever the specifics of the etymology, however, goblin and kobold are connected, and seem to also be connected to a root word referring to an enclosure or house, identifying the earliest concept of these beings as spirits of the home, and possibly places more broadly. Goblins are known as dwelling in the home, in forests, and in underground places as well. They were generally not particularly fierce and could be benevolent, one reason why Tolkien later opted to use a different word to describe his purely evil villains. The name goblin was adopted into the Welsh language as goblin, which refers to a type of mine-dwelling spirit which helps miners by warning them about impending cave-ins. In Cornwall, the same spirit was called a knocker, or a Tommy knocker, due to the knocking sound it was said to make, which could warn miners of danger. This served as the inspiration for one of Stephen King's books. Sometimes these mine-dwelling goblins appear interchangeable with dwarves, but they almost certainly have a different origin. In Old Norse texts, the Verger were part of the structural foundations of the world, creating things like the cardinal directions, the great possessions of the gods, and holding up the world from sinking into the abyss, something mirrored in their association with the unconscious world and poetry. But there is no inkling that goblins ever held such an important role in the formation of the cosmos. Instead, they appear similar to the genius loci of the Romans, spirits of particular places, perhaps originally and most specifically the home, which would correspond to the proposed etymology. However, they are likewise distinct from elves, which are primarily ancestral spirits, also sometimes associated with specific places and the home, not because of the place, however, but because of the people associated with the place, or potentially burial mounds. Elves sometimes play a role in fathering heroes and kings. Goblins never do. However, it's easy to see how all these things can get jumbled together in most people's minds after hundreds of years of Christianization. One of the first written accounts in the French language referred to goblins haunting a specific place. In our earliest English source, this is also the case. The tale called The Benevolent Goblin, contained in the book Gesta Romanorum, dating to about the late 13th century, tells of a goblin who dwelt on a hill in the middle of a dense wood. When knights would stop there and call out, "I thirst," the goblin would appear and provide them a drink from his fine horn. Eventually a knight stole his horn, and the goblin would no longer come. His lord punished the knight for this, and gifted the horn to the King of England. But the goblin was never seen again. The story is the clearest English evidence that the original nature of the goblin was the equivalent of the genius loci of the Romans. Even the story of his remarkable horn echoes Roman depictions of the genius loci, who is often depicted on altars and in other art carrying a cornucopia. As spirits of places, they would hold sway over the houses, the fields, the forests, or perhaps mines in their area of influence. Romans would make small sacrifices to such spirits to win their favor, and likely Germanic people had similar practices. However, like the Greek kobalos, the goblin was a trickster and could bring misfortune if displeased. A tale called The Master Thief recalls this darker nature of the goblin. So on he went with his ox. Then the youth sprang down from the tree, ran by a shortcut, and got before him, and once more hung himself up on a tree in the road before the man. How, I should like to know, if you really were so sick at heart that you hanged yourself there, or if it is only a hobgoblin that is before me. Ah, well, you may hang there for me, whether you are a hobgoblin or not. And on he went with his ox. This is the second time the man came across the young man hanging from a tree. The first time he was sorrowful, but this time he is suspicious. That he suspects it's a hobgoblin pretending to be a dead child shows us some of the rather frightening tricks that they were thought to get up to. Activity that we would ascribe to ghosts haunting people today. There is likely no difference between a goblin and a hobgoblin. Hob is thought to derive from Rob, short for Robin Goodfellow, with the title Goodfellow being akin to the good folk used to describe fairies and other such beings. Similar naming is used in Gaelic for the Dunashi, but possibly also for the god known frequently as the Dagda, who is the lord of the burial mounds, whose name means the good god. The purpose of these types of names are sublimation. They're used to appease the spirit in order to invoke their beneficial side, as opposed to invoking their darker nature. Robin Goodfellow, Hob, Rob, Puck, all appear to be other English names for the same spirits known for trickery, but which can also be helpful. J.R.R. Tolkien's Hobbits are ultimately his own spin-off of the Hobgoblin. Though this seems to have been in part unconsciously done, we see very similar constructions frequently in names like Hob, Hobgoblin, Hobby, Hobbity. The 1895 Denham Tracts provides a list of names of spirits known to the English. One of the names listed is Hobbits. Given his interest in folklore, Tolkien had almost certainly read the Denham Tracts before, but had forgotten the source for the name when he was later asked. Hobbit is just a particular local rendering of the many Hob-related names, associated with beings typically benign, although sometimes tricksy.
Oh, those tricksy little hobbitses. Oh, no, my precious.
Like with elves and dwarves, Tolkien's goblins are imagined as flesh and blood, but it's more accurate to think of them as ghosts. Because they were difficult or impossible to see, they end up being described as diminutive and able to hide easily. While elves are ancestral spirits of light and consciousness, and dwarves are creative spirits of the subterranean subconscious, goblins or kobolds appear to be spirits of places. All of these beings are later jumbled and confused in folktales, making them nearly interchangeable. But from our earliest sources we can perhaps get a glimpse of their original conception. The original goblin, though sometimes tricksy, was generally not the evil spirit that many fantasy settings made them out to be. Like the Welsh goblin, they might even try to save your life from a cave-in, or prevent your home from burning to the ground. On the other hand, if you angered it, the goblin might just ensure that you forget to turn off your stove. Well, I hope you liked the video, and if you did, please like, share, and subscribe, and consider supporting the channel in whatever way is most suitable for you. Thank you all for watching, and as always, stand tall.